Vivian stood at the altar, her hands trembling as she clutched the bouquet she'd dreamt of holding since college. The scent of white lily filled the air, but the seat at the end of the aisle, the one meant for Frank, was empty. Guests whispered, exchanging uneasy glances, their murmurs growing louder with every passing minute. Her mother's eyes darted between the door and the clock, but Vivian's heart already knew the truth. Frank wasn't coming. Vivian had always been the kind of girl who believed her dreams could be stitched together, one seam at a time. While her college mates chased parties and fleeting love, she sat by the window of her small hostel room, sewing gowns under the faint glow of a desk lamp. Her hands moved like poetry, steady, patient, full of quiet purpose. Sewing paid her bills, but more than that, it kept her sane. And then there was Frank, the boy who borrowed her scissors one day and never really returned her heart. He was charming in the way ambition often is, full of promises and the sparkle of big dreams. He wanted to study abroad, but had no means. Vivian, driven by love and hope, took on extra sewing work. The sound of her sewing machine became a rhythm of sacrifice. Every dress she made brought him closer to his dream, and unknowingly, farther from her. Frank and Vivian's love story bloomed between fabric scraps and shared laughter. He'd stop by her sewing space, holding takeout or coffee, praising her work as if she were already a renowned designer. She blushed at every compliment, believing their love was stitched to last. When he spoke about studying overseas, she didn't hesitate. "I'll help," she said softly, and she did. The money from wedding dresses, prom gowns, and office suits all went to his dream. Friends warned her that love could be selfish, but Vivian believed theirs was different. "He'll come back for me," she said confidently. She even began designing her own wedding dress, a masterpiece of lace and satin, believing she'd walk down the aisle in it someday. Each stitch carried a silent prayer, for loyalty, for forever. Frank's departure day felt like a movie ending too soon. Vivian tried to smile as she handed him the envelope with the last of the money she'd saved. He promised he'd return. "You'll see me in a few years, Vivian. We'll have the life we dreamed of." She held him tightly at the airport, inhaling his scent as if memorizing him. But something inside her stirred. Fear, maybe. The kind that whispers when love becomes a gamble. He hugged her and said, "Wait for me. I'll be back for us soon." For months, she received letters, sweet, hopeful ones. But slowly they stopped coming. Calls went unanswered. Then came silence. Vivian kept writing, but her inbox became a graveyard of unsent words. She told herself he was just busy, but deep down, she knew love doesn't forget to call. 5 years later, he came back. And for a moment, everything seemed right again. Frank proposed under the same tree they first met, and she said yes before he finished asking. She wore the biggest smile in the world that day. The wedding day arrived. Her dream dress ready, flowers set, guests waiting. Vivian stood at the altar. Her hands clutched the bouquet she'd dreamt of holding since college, her heart fluttering in excitement. But as hours passed and Frank never showed, her reflection blurred with tears. Calls went unanswered and whispers filled the air. Frank was gone. Again, this time without a word. The wedding dress she'd poured her heart into became a cruel reminder of what love had taken from her. The man she'd loved, the man she helped send abroad with every penny she earned sewing for others, had vanished on their wedding day. As the choir's song faded awkwardly, Vivian's knees buckled. The white fabric of her gown pulled around her as tears blurred her vision. The wedding that was supposed to be her fairy tale turned into a public heartbreak. Cameras flashed. Whispers cut like glass. Later that night, still in her wedding dress, she sat alone in her apartment. Her phone buzzed with messages of pity and curiosity, but not a single word from Frank. In that silence, She tore off her veil and whispered to herself, "Maybe one day I'll wear a wedding dress again, but not for someone who never deserved it." That was the night Vivian's world shattered, and unknowingly, the night she began to rebuild it. Weeks turned into months, but the wound refused to heal. Vivian packed away her wedding gown, sealed it in a box, and shoved it beneath her bed. Every stitch reminded her of love lost and promises broken. But life, as always, demanded she move on. Bills piled up, and her small tailoring business, which once sewed love stories for others, began to crumble under her grief. One morning, as she sat before her sewing machine, her fingers hovered over the fabric, motionless. The hum of the needle used to calm her. Now it mocked her. Then, through tears, she made a decision. If her heart couldn't heal, maybe her hands could. Vivian began sewing again. Not for brides this time, but for herself. Each design was born from her pain. Each stitch a piece of her broken heart transformed into beauty. Slowly, orders returned. Her work carried an emotion people could feel, even without knowing her story. And so, from heartbreak, a brand began to rise: Vivian Threads. 2 years later, Vivian's name was whispered in fashion circles as the girl who stitched emotions into fabric. Her designs told silent stories of strength and femininity. She didn't smile as much, but her eyes carried depth, the kind only pain could give. She'd stopped waiting for closure. Frank had vanished completely. No calls, no explanations. She'd learned to accept that sometimes silence is the answer. Her friend and assistant, Clara, often said, "Vivian, your pain became your brand." And though Vivian smiled faintly inside, she wondered if healing was possible without forgiveness. One afternoon, while delivering a gown to a client, Vivian overheard 2 women talking about a man returning from abroad, a businessman who left his fiancée years ago. Her heart skipped. For a second, her past felt dangerously close. But she brushed it off. That night, as she worked late, thunder rumbled outside. She stared at the wedding gown sketch on her desk, elegant, yet unclaimed. "Maybe one day," she murmured. But not yet. It was a bright morning when Sarah walked into the studio. Tall, radiant, and kind-eyed, she spoke softly, but with a warmth that immediately filled the room. "You're Vivian, right? Everyone says you're the best," she said, smiling. Vivian nodded, professional but guarded. "That depends. What kind of dress are you dreaming of?" Sarah laughed. "Something timeless. My fiancé says he wants to see me in white that feels like hope." Vivian smiled faintly at the word. Hope. Together they began designing the gown. Sarah came for fittings often, sharing snippets of her love story with her fiancé. How they met, how he was abroad for years, how fate brought them back together. Vivian listened politely, never expecting the twist that fate was weaving behind the scenes. On one fitting day, Sarah showed Vivian a picture of her fiancé. The world seemed to freeze again. It was Frank. Her fingers trembled, the measuring tape slipping from her hand. "Are you all right?" Sarah asked, concerned. Vivian forced a smile and whispered, "Yes. It's just been a long day." That night, Vivian sat alone in her apartment, staring at the wedding gown sketches pinned to her wall. Her heart pounded with memories she'd buried deep. Frank's laughter, his promises, his betrayal. She wanted to scream, to ask why life was this cruel. But instead, she whispered to herself, "You've come too far to break now." In the following weeks, Vivian sewed Sarah's gown with a strange calmness. Every fold of fabric carried her restraint, every stitch, a quiet act of self-control. When Sarah talked about her excitement for the wedding, Vivian smiled gently, even when her soul twisted inside. Clara noticed her silence. "Vivian, you sure you're okay?" Vivian looked up and said softly, "Pain doesn't scare me anymore, Clara. I've lived through worse. Yet, Deep down, she knew this wedding wasn't just another order. It was destiny's cruel test, to see if she had truly healed or merely learned to hide her scars. Days passed, but Vivian couldn't unsee that photograph. Frank, the man she once loved with every beat of her heart, was going to marry another woman. Every time Sarah mentioned his name with joy, Vivian's stomach tightened. One Friday evening, Sarah came for her final fitting. "My fiancé's back in town," she said with excitement. "He wants to meet the designer behind my dream dress." Vivian froze. "He does?" "Yes, I told him how amazing you are." Sarah smiled warmly. "He insists on thanking you himself." Vivian's throat felt dry. She tried to protest, but before she could, the studio door opened. A familiar voice said, "So this is the woman behind the magic." Frank stood there, older, more refined, but unmistakably the same. For a moment, both their worlds stopped. His smile faltered the second he saw her. Vivian's heart raced, but she forced composure. "Hello, Mr. Collins," she said coldly. "Congratulations." Frank swallowed hard. "Vivian." But she cut him off with a calm smile. "The gown will be ready on schedule." Sarah, oblivious to the tension, smiled between them. "You two already know each other." Vivian replied softly, "You could say that." After that meeting, the air in the studio grew heavy. Vivian threw herself into her work, avoiding emotions that clawed at the surface. Frank's eyes had carried something. Guilt, or maybe regret, but she refused to care. That night, she dreamed of their college days. Frank sitting on the grass, talking about going abroad, about building a future for both of them. She remembered the envelope of cash she gave him, her life savings. The next morning, Clara noticed the dark circles under Vivian's eyes. "You look like you saw a ghost," she teased gently. Vivian gave a faint smile. "I did, Clara, and this time I won't let it haunt me." Meanwhile, Frank couldn't stop thinking about her. He found excuses to drop by the studio with Sarah, offering polite conversation. But every glance he gave Vivian carried an unspoken apology. Vivian stayed polite, professional, but distant. The girl who once cried for him no longer existed. Only the woman who rebuilt herself from ruins remained. Still, when he finally said, "Vivian, can we talk?" she hesitated. For reasons she couldn't explain, she said yes. They met at a quiet cafe near her studio. The soft hum of background music did little to ease the tension. Frank looked down at his coffee. "You deserved an explanation," he began. Vivian said nothing. "I didn't mean to hurt you. When I got the call to leave for the airport immediately, because I'm to report for my new job ASAP, I thought I'd contact you and come back for you once I was stable. But things changed." Vivian laughed softly, bitterly. "You left me on our wedding day, Frank. That's not things change, that's betrayal." He flinched. "I was scared. You were doing so much for me. I felt small, like I didn't deserve you." She looked at him sharply. "And breaking me was your way of proving it." He sighed. "I came back because I couldn't stop thinking about you. Seeing you again." "Stop," her tone was firm. "You're marrying Sarah. Whatever guilt you carry, don't dump it here. I've already buried my pain." Frank's eyes glistened. "I'm sorry, Vivian." She stood up, her voice soft but strong. "You're not sorry you left. You're sorry I survived it." She left him there, tears forming but never falling. The wedding gown neared completion, but something about it felt heavier than any she'd ever made. Each stitch seemed to whisper of closure and confrontation. Sarah walked in one afternoon, glowing with happiness. "Vivian, Frank and I are so grateful. You've made this wedding so special." Vivian smiled, a little tighter than usual. "I'm glad you're happy, Sarah." As she adjusted the gown, her reflection caught in the mirror, standing beside Sarah in white, and for a split second, she saw herself years ago. Sarah looked at her through the mirror. "You know, Vivian, I can feel there's a story behind your eyes. Vivian paused. We all have one, she said quietly. Later that night, she opened the box under her bed. Her wedding dress. The one that gave her pain. She ran her hand over its fabric, still as flawless as the day she made it. A tear slipped down her cheek. Not anymore, she whispered. The day before Sarah's wedding arrived. The studio buzzed with final fittings, laughter, and excitement. Vivian stayed composed, focusing on details, refusing to let emotions show. As Sarah left, Frank lingered behind. Vivian, he said softly. I can't marry her without telling you the truth. Vivian stiffened. There's nothing left to tell. There is, he insisted. I didn't come back to marry Sarah. It was an arrangement. Her father, he's my investor. It's complicated. Vivian's eyes widened. And does she know? He hesitated. Not everything. Vivian's voice hardened. Then you're about to break another woman's heart, Frank. Just like you did mine. She turned away, tears glimmering under her eyes. Frank stepped closer, desperate. Vivian, I never stopped loving you, she whispered without turning. Then you should have stayed. The door closed behind him, leaving only silence, and the sound of a sewing machine starting again. Vivian sewed through her pain, one last time. The next day's wedding would change everything. The morning sun crept through Vivian's window, painting soft gold across her studio. The wedding gown stood on a mannequin, flawless and glowing, a symbol of perfection, crafted by imperfect memories. Clara arrived early, humming. You look calm for someone sewing her ex's bride's gown, she teased. Vivian smiled faintly. Maybe calm is just what's left when you've cried everything out. The wedding car arrived to collect the gown. Vivian insisted on delivering it herself. As she zipped the dress bag, her hands shook slightly. For once, she whispered, let me walk into pain and not crumble. Don't miss the next twist. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories.